Hey guys, Technomentary here with a video for you guys. In today's video, we're going to be comparing the iPhone XS versus the iPhone XR in a head-to-head comparison between these two phones. We're going to look at the hardware, the software, and overall performance of these two phones in 2021. We're going to break down everything for you guys, whether you guys are choosing to decide buying either of the phone or looking to upgrade from another phone or upgrading between either or as well. We're going to break everything down to help you make that decision. But before we go ahead and get started, if you guys are new to our channel, we do a lot of tech news reviews and giveaways, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, if you guys are in the market for either of these phenomenal devices and are looking to get a discounted price, make sure you guys check out the link in the description section as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with today's review of these two phones. First thing we want to mention about these two phones is the release date of these two phones. So these phones were released in September 2018 for the iPhone S here, and the R was released in October of 2018 as well. So almost a month and a half difference between these two devices. And why is that? We'll get to that in a little bit later. But before we get to that, let's talk about the actual build of these two phones. Well, you'll notice both of these build of the phones are pretty unique in that both of them does have both front and back being all glass to it. Of course, noticeable difference between it. On the S has two dual 12 megapixel camera versus the single on the R as well, and that's where you want to see the difference in the back as well. But besides the front and the back being all glass, there's another difference between these two phones is the actual build of these two phones. Is that you notice the 10R has this aerospace gray body to it, so that's an aluminum body, versus the XS, which is surgical grade stainless steel body. And that's evident when you look at these two phones, comparing them. Let's turn off the light here. If you compare these two phones on the actual side by side and take a look at the bezel here. So if we take a look at the bezel here side by side, you'll notice that the bezel on the S is more shiny versus the R, which is more matte. Same if you look at the top and the side as well, and everywhere else, same amount of speakers and much more to these two phones. The other thing we want to talk about between these two phones, if you hold it side by side, is the actual difference between the weight of these two phones. They're slightly different, and because of the size difference, actually, it might not be really noticeable because it's not quite that obvious, but the 6.1 angle display on the R is a bigger display versus the 5.8 on the iPhone S here, and hence why the R is actually slightly heavier in terms of the weight. So if you're looking at the weight comparison, the R weighs around 6.84 ounce or 194 grams versus the S, which weighs around 6.24 ounce or 177 an ounce. Almost sort of 20 ounces of difference between it. Doesn't really feel much, not really, it's really negligible. Of course, the R does feel slightly bigger in your hand compared to the S if you really take it, but for someone with a smaller to medium sized hand, it fits really well. Of course, if you're a bigger hand, you might be looking at something along the Max, which the S here does have, which distinguishes from the R. The R does not have a Max version, so if you're looking for a Max, you're gonna have to go with the XS Max. So that's the difference between the X lineup, is that the Max is possible with the XS. Even the regular X does not have a Max version, so that's probably one of the big factor between these two phones. And also, one thing we want to talk about these two phones is the price point of it. So there's a difference in the price point, and that also comes in two aspects. Is that because the build of the display is probably where the price point, and the camera, of course, is what makes the price point difference between these. The iPhone XR, when released originally, started at $749 for the base 64 gig model. You're also able to get the 128 gig, which was the other option, around $799, whereas the XS actually started at $999 price point for the 64 gig, and you are able to pay extra couple $100 more to get the 512 gig one, so more storage, maxed out 512, which is the current day seems to be the max limit for Apple devices as well. And why is there a big difference in price? Well, a couple of things is that OLED build on the 5.8S display makes it a little bit more costly, as Apple has said, versus that Retina LCD display on the R, which Apple said kind of made up the difference. Well, there's other things beside it. You see that the S was released a month or so between these, and Apple might have decided when they bumped up the price, they wanted to price something a little bit lower for consumers to pick on if they didn't want to pay almost $1,000, and that's where the R was built, which wasn't sort of that announced in the original annual release, so hence why you have that difference. And a couple of things we want to talk about between these displays, it's really important to mention, is that OLED versus the liquid retina is that on the S here it does have HDR display, which isn't found on the R as well. Another aspect is the actual the resolution on the iPhone on S, which is better as well. It's a 2436 by 1125 pixel resolution compared to the R, which has around 1792 by 828 pixel between it. And that's another aspect you want to talk about resolution is the PPI between this. The iPhone S does have a 458 PPI compared to 326 PPI, so almost 130 PPI differences between it, which makes the OLED display much cleaner in terms of when you're looking at things. Not really too noticeable, but if you like that OLED feel and the comparison to it, it might be something that's a make it or break it for you for these two phones. The other aspect about OLED versus the liquid retina is the fact that with the OLED, you have 1,000,000 to 1 contrast ratio compared to 14 to 1 on the R here. And one noticeable difference we want to talk about on these devices is the actual touch to it. So the iPhone S does have a 3D display touch, so when you touch something it almost feels as it's 3D, versus the iPhone XR, which has this haptic feedback to it. Noticeably not much to compare. You're not, unless you use it heavily, you may notice the feel is slightly different between these two devices. And let's talk about the other aspect of iPhone, what makes iPhone great, or its camera. So what kind of camera differences can you expect from both of these devices? Well, as we know, when you looked at the back on the actual physical differences, you have the dual 12 megapixel camera versus that single megapixel camera on the back of these two phones. Hence why there's subtle differences between the camera of these two phones. Of course, in your portrait mode, both of these phones are able to take about the same, except that the S does have that telephoto lens, which allows you to do optical zoom 2 times better than the R, which does not have that ability as well. And if you talk about portrait mode, which is another aspect Apple has made, is that you'll notice that the portrait mode option between the S and the R are slightly different. The R only has studio and contour light available compared to the S, which has all the other portrait mode that are available, such as stage light. You also have stage light mono and then high key light mono as well. And the other aspect we want to talk about is the camera of these two phones, the video aspect of it. Both of the phones can actually record 4K maxed out at 60 frames per second, and it starts at 720 pixels. So you're not missing out if you're recording between these devices. Of course, the zoom level again on the S is better compared to the R. And let's get to the other aspect of these two phones. So both of the phones are able to upgrade to iOS 14, which is the latest iOS on these devices, and we have tested most of the popular apps which are fully supported because they are running the latest iOS. That's the one thing whenever you when a phone starts getting iOS, the apps stop working. But with both of these devices, the apps, most of the apps that we have running that you normally would have are working phenomenally, whether you're using it to watch streaming site, Netflix, Hulu, or Disney Plus, anything like that. Both of the phones does have it. The OLED makes it feel more better, in a way. Not really a word to describe it, but if you're someone that's looking to do such things, you might notice that as well on the phone. And both of the phones we suspect will get around the same amount of life in terms of iOS updates. So we can most likely see both of these getting iOS at least another 2 to 3 years without any major issue with it. So both of them will probably go up to iOS 16, 17 before Apple stops the release. And that's when you start to really see things slow down. But besides that, we're not going to see any slowdown anytime in the near future. Of course, the price between these two phones right now, or if you're buying it pre-owned or used, might be getting a good discount at either of these two phones. The reason why the S might be better because it's more powerful in terms of your daily use and such. One thing we want to talk about probably is the battery life on these two phones, because a lot of things between these two phones are very similar in terms of the battery is a distinguishing factor. One thing you notice is that the R actually has a better battery to it because it doesn't have OLED, which is a known factor to consume a little more power on these two phones. The R actually has a 16-hour video playback compared to the S, which has 14 hours. 2 hours difference in terms of video playback. But if you're a light to medium user, both of these two phones on a single charge will get you throughout the whole day. If you're using it for basic calling and such things like text and light browsing, both of the phones will do a phenomenal job for it as well. Of course, the iPhone 12 is out right now, and if you're not looking to spend that $1,000, these two phones are good phones, but the S in a couple of ways is better than the R. Of course, as we mentioned, the display is better. You have that dual camera, gives you better photography and portrait mode option available to it. And of course, with the S, just having that more of that feel with that body size that it has to it, that surgical grade, it's a little bit better in those aspects. Of course, the R here, a couple of things is that it does have a little bit better battery life, and it's a little bit bigger in terms of the screen size, but the OLED kind of beats that. And our final conclusion comes to between these two devices is which one should you get? Should you upgrade between it? Well, if you had the chance to buy one or the other in 2021, we probably would say get the S. It's just a little bit more power pack for a little extra buck compared to the R, which seems like a cheaper build in some ways. Of course, if you're looking for color, you find the R has multitude of colors ranging from your blue to your white, black, yellow even, coral, and product red. And the iPhone 10 is limited to its base Apple colors. You have your silver, gold, and space gray to it. So there you guys have it for the build of these two phones, the review of it. We want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think about these two phones if you're using one or the other in 2021? How is it holding up? Which one is your favorite? If you use both of them, leave a comment in the comment section. Also, thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you guys watch the next video as well. See you guys next time.